Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to this review for Pacific Rim 2 Uprising. This is Ian here, and I gotta say, I'm right off the press here, glad to get a long-awaited dose of some giant robots just wrecking stuff. Gotta admit, I've always been kind of partial to this. I've missed out. Last Transformers didn't bother going to see last night, and if I recall, it's been since 2013 since we had a Pacific Rim movie, but here we are. Just an early heads up, this is going to be dealing with a few things in spoiler territory. So if you don't want any of that, if you want to just wait and see the film, now you know this will be your time to make a quick exit. If not, just stay tuned and sit back and listen. So here we are with our second entry in the Pacific Rim franchise. Now, one thing you'll probably catch about this film right off the bat is it's pretty comfortable with its own skin and with itself. And despite anything else that you hear or any other reviews that you read for this, this is something that I think keeps the film fun. It's not something that it takes itself too seriously. I'd argue a lot of that if you think there's a weaving plot that's sort of complex elements get kind of dropped within the first 45 minutes or so. Yes, there are a lot of things that are predictable, but this turns out to be a surprisingly fun ride. And that was something that was welcome here. You've got a good cast, with the main character including John Boyega. You'll notice him as Finn from Star Wars, slipping back into his London accent pretty darn smoothly here. And this is a guy that always adds some fun, jazz, and some class to whatever role he's given, even if he doesn't have a whole lot of expansive room with that role, or if it's not a super complicated character or anything like that. Here in Pacific Rim 2, John is playing as Jake Pentecost. He is the son of the late Stacker Pentecost from the last film, who died a hero sacrificing himself to seal off the interdimensional warp that was bringing the kaiju, or rather the kaiju were being sent to our world from. Now, he leads a very different life from his father. He, instead of enlisting and permanently staying in military service and keeping a rigid schedule and upkeep, this is very much someone who's content with kind of living the life of a scavenger, somewhat of a thief. In fact, he squatted in a mansion with a bunch of friends at the beginning of the film. And this is part of the thing. I think through his character, he's a good vehicle for this. I think bringing to us the fact that this isn't instantly going to be a super serious epic that just over saturates itself off the bat, and that's kind of refreshing. He even has a note tracking back through some of the progress of the first Pacific Rim movie, and then right at the end of that short intro says, "I'm not my father," and just quickly kind of brings us into his life. The idea is after this war, the kaiju, of course, years have passed, but still, there's devastation everywhere. There's some coastal communities that never recovered from the kaiju. In fact, there's just massive skeletons and remains left in some places still. And it turns out that Jaeger tech, which are, of course, the Jaegers used to combat the kaijus, the tech is sold for a lot to the highest bidder, and whoever can get a hold of some of the hottest parts pretty much lives like a king. So this is something that Jake goes after just gratuitously. And he's obviously been at this for a while, but he, in almost Han Solo fashion, has ticked off a lot of groups too. So he spends a little bit of time on the run or trying to get back in the good graces of similar groups of thieves and other runners himself. So right at the start, early on in our film, this brings him into contact with a pretty scrappy young 15-year-old girl named Amara. She's played by Kylie Spaney. Turns out this girl's definitely a gearhead. She managed to hide away and build her own Jaeger, a really small one, mind you. Fortunately, the advantage to that is it only requires one mind to run this instead of having to do the neural handshake between two pilots. In most cases, of course, Jaegers, if you don't have two pilots, it's too much mental strain and can mess you up pretty bad if you try to pull the whole load yourself. So, in any case, circumstances force Jake to re-enlist in the military against his will, but it keeps him out of at least going to prison, immediate trouble. He gets reunited with his sister, his adoptive sister, Mako Mori, of course, who was taken in by his father. And Mago's really the one who seems to be able to drive Jake at all or try to push him back on track. Fortunately, Rinko Kikuchi, she's reprising her role here, so this is one of the only few familiar faces we have returning from the previous Pacific Rim. And again, that idea, as well as just with passage of time and the military change and everything else, she's moved to an office of high command at this point, and really wants to see Jake achieve his potential, but he's really not too bothered with doing so. This really drops us right into the weavings of uh, some plot webs and things like that, but they really fall apart. Like I mentioned earlier, within the first 35, 40 minutes or so, the pretenses sort of drop with that, and we just get right to the wanton destruction and going with what this movie actually knows it's good at. But the idea, in short, is there is a corporate drama with a company from Shanghai that is trying to automate the Jaeger process, so essentially to make the need for pilots completely obsolete. The idea is to have these drones on the ready, prepared, and have all of this run autonomously to cut down on the difficult search for pilots who are even capable of successfully doing a neural handshake and piloting Jaegers in the first place. This goes horribly wrong, which leads to really the giant plot hole of the film, and that is these drones end up effectively becoming kaiju hybrids, hybridized with Jaegers. They end up taking over the systems completely and replicating themselves. Now, craziest thing here, of course, the kaiju threat has been sealed off, walled off, and the hive minds, especially these precursors, these powerful psychic beings, still try to have influence through whatever mediums they can. It turns out one of the main brains that was captured, the kaiju minds, it's captured after the war, has been kept in isolation, kept in keeping, but for some reason it's kept by one of the other few primary characters from the last film, Newt. He just has this just chilling out in his bedroom, and no one knows, or no one knew how he got this high-end top secret. I don't even. But essentially, he gets corrupted over time through the hive mind and ends up turning against humanity, pretty much selling things out and working from the inside to sabotage the entire drone operation, and really wants to use this operation as his chance to end the world. So, surprise attack on the main Jaeger base, conveniently kills all the pilots, opens that up for the cadets to take their places and take their shot at saving the world. There's an attempt to open up the portals again and to bring all the kaiju through. A few make it through, total of 3, and they all head for Mount Fuji. Now, apparently the idea is they've always been aiming for Mount Fuji. That's always been the aim. They want to attempt to terraform the Earth, but they've never made it there fully to spread their matter within the volcano. The idea is their blood is highly reactive. About at this point, as we head towards the main finale of the movie, I found out, or at least felt, what it was like to get directly trolled by a film. Just to give you some context, this comes in the form of vocalist Edward Keel's now internet meme famous Trollolol, aka you get the idea. I'm sure you've seen this one around before, but this was just sort of dropped on us out of the blue. It's corny, it's goofy, it's cheesy, and it could very well make you shake your head. But you know what? You got giant robots being rigged with NASA-style machinery being fired over to Japan. So at this point, I'll deal with it. Even still, as we barrel on right into the conclusion of the movie, we still get a couple large plot holes, more plot holes rather, that open up here, mainly in the form of the really small, almost micro kaiju that end up fusing the main 3 kaiju that actually made it through the gates, portals together. They fused them into one being. I guess the first one is less of a plot hole than just questioning why, with Newt using his, I'm just going to call it kaiju iPad, okay, didn't just swarm the Jaegers with that instead of fusing those. I'm not sure. and the whole everything behind the whole interfacing between the kaiju, how they were the man-made versions, at least, how that development process took place. It's like the film tried to explore that early, never really took that to its furthest end, just sort of gave that up. So we don't. There's a lot of more questions we have rather than answers when it comes to that. And of course the biggest thing, who's been keeping track of all the new proprietary items, over the years, not just the tech that mankind has created, but who's holding all the different kaiju biomasses, who's not just researching this stuff, but who's reappropriating and learning how to retool it and recalibrate it. So a lot of crazy just got goofy things come out of that. But even still, by the end of this, you've got a full ride that really does not feel like a Transformers esque mech movie, which was, what, it's welcome, fine. We also have a couple of other, I think, good roles here that were played out. One was especially in the form of Scott Eastwood, it's Clint Eastwood's son, playing the cocky jock foil to Jake, with his character Nate, and of course these two end up piloting together. They have a past where they sort of go way back. Nate is the type who likes to keep rigid discipline. Jake pretty much represents the opposite of that. So they clash, but they still manage to pull everything they can and pilot together and pretty much rock house. Honestly, another thing I got to say about Scott Eastwood is I loved how much fun he's been having on the worldwide press tour. He vlogged a lot of this on Instagram, and frankly, how lighthearted he was is pretty welcome. He makes fun of his own Mandarin during his visit to Beijing, and just generally really just adds to the fun flavor of all this, and has pretty much hammed it up however he could. Looking at the film overall, this is, of course, not an origin story by any means. It is in every way a sequel, and very much wants to open things up to a third movie. That looks like where we're heading, making this into a trilogy. The soundtrack does about everything you want for an action movie. Highs are highs where they are, and if you're a close listener to things like this, I think predictable in a sense as well. I mean, that's something pretty pervasive, in the whole film. But for what it was, hey, honestly, fun. I had a good time, and I think at the end of the day, that's one thing we at least hopefully still go to movies for. So what are we looking at this? I'm gonna say, out of how many kaiju's I rate this, I'm gonna give this 6 kaiju's out of 10. Fine for where it was, a nice splash coming in near the end of March, and of course setting up for a trilogy. My one hope with this is that it does not become a gag reel of itself. I think the last movie is going to need to, I think, pick a direction firmer. The first Pacific Rim definitely had a little bit more of an epic tone. This has those moments, but I think purposely kind of pokes at them, makes fun of them, has just a few goofball things, some better placed than others, but it's comfortable in its own skin. It recognizes what it is, and I hope when we see the third incarnation of this, because I'm sure we will, that it picks out even more of a flavor for itself. Looks like this hit about 2.4 million just during the Thursday night, some of the opening previews, and it's on track for a 23 million 3-day stretch. It's had about 155 million budgeted, so of course we're still looking back to get a lot of gains here, but we'll watch this where it lands in the box office and where it hits over time. I do have to say the scale of this is on the money. That's something that I think really added to this. Of course, I mean it seems to go without saying in a giant mecha movie, or with huge monsters and whatnot, you'd be able to have the type of destruction you can imagine these things would cause. And again, that's hit pretty accurately here. I think with casings, shell casings the size of tanks, from weaponry that ruins skyscrapers and things like that. It hits all those buttons right where it should and how it should. So that's going to do it for me here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Of course, you can come right back into our channel anytime. That's for movie reviews. Lots of gaming coming up. Also with our show reviews, Chris has cut into Walking Dead, and we're going to be having Legion and a few other things starting up soon. But with that, Thanks again for listening. Take it easy. Have a good one. Hey people, thank you for tuning into this episode and taking a listen. If you like our content, if you like what you're listening to, there anything to go over, hey, please, we would not only love to hear more from you, but if great, if you could throw some support, you can subscribe right below. Also, you can toss us a line anytime. That's ksongmedia@gmail.com. Of course, you can tune in for our channel anytime for movie reviews, game reviews, a lot of random wacky stuff. Yeah, who knows what you'll hear. And of course, our episode each week where we're bringing the nerdiest things we can find, dig up, and maybe not find. Maybe the stuff that just drops in our laps. But anyway, hey, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. We hope to hear from you again later. Take care.